This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Indeed. Anyone who's ever had to hire people knows one thing. Finding good candidates fast is easier said than done. If only I'd known that when it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast by ensuring your post is at the top of the page for your relevant candidates. It makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications. When I was looking to hire someone, finding people with the right skills was slow and overwhelming. Oh, I wish I had known about Indeed. Plus, there are no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. But how fast is Indeed really? Well, in the minute we've been talking, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of The Shift will get £100 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/theshift. Just go to indeed.com/theshift right now and please support us by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/theshift. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40, created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster, Sam Baker. My guest today is the Ukrainian chef, food writer and activist, Olia Hercules. Olia was born in the south of Ukraine and has lived in the UK since her late teens. After working in journalism, she decided to follow her heart, her stomach, and arguably her heritage and become a chef. She trained at Leith School of Food and Wine, worked in kitchens, including as a chef de partie for Yotam Ottolenghi, and as a recipe developer. But really her mission was to make people rethink their attitude to Eastern European, and specifically Ukrainian food. She's written 3 cookbooks, including Mamushka, which won the Fortnum's Award for Best Debut. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, life changed forever for Olia and her family, who lived in the Kherson region. As Olia says, they lost their homes and their livelihoods, but they are all still alive.
It was like an inner joke between the 3 of us. It was just our thing. And Vera always said it. So your age, your life is like a day, different seasons or the different times of day. And she said, the message was that we will always be beautiful, whether you're night, day or morning beauty,
Her brother signed up to fight and Olia turned activist, launching Cook for Ukraine and raising over $1 million for supplies for Ukrainians. I was lucky enough to visit Olia for lunch at home in East London to talk about her new book, Strong Roots, a moving portrait of the history of Ukraine through generations of her family. Being descended from a long line of powerful women, making the decision to retrain as a chef, and how it felt to discover she is a carrier of Fragile X syndrome, which meant that she was unexpectedly plunged into premature menopause and everything that entails. At just 38. Well, firstly, I have to say I am so spoiled because I am sitting in Olia Hercules. I don't call it kitchen because it's so much more than a kitchen. If it's okay with you, I might actually put some pictures on the show notes. Is that all right?
It's all good.
Oh my God, it's the most amazing room. And I would say it's like my fantasy kind of Ukrainian summer kitchen, which is not something I had a fantasy of until I read your book. But I know that I wouldn't look after it properly. But it's fabulous. It's a gorgeous day and it's so lovely and calm. And I've just been fed by the most amazing chef. So this is like I'm winning at life today. So thank you, Olia, so much for having me and feeding me and everything and letting me into your wonderful home. Is this your little bit of Ukraine in East London?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I never set out for it to be some kind of a Ukrainian museum, but it just organically grew into what it is now.
I mean, having read the book, so obviously people listening won't have read Strong Roots, and we'll talk about it in a second, but it feels like, having read it, it almost feels like the physical embodiment of the book.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
It's like, heirlooms and photos and fermenting jars full of goodness knows what. And so tell me about Strong Roots and what made you write it, because it's your first non-cookbook, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I actually did want to write it in 2014. I've always thought that my family history was special, or at least it was really interesting.
It is really interesting.
And then I thought, is it just me because it's my family? Because obviously people are interested in their own families. And then I thought, and is it that special? Because actually, quite millions of Ukrainians have very similar stories in a way. So I wanted to write it after the initial. When the war started in 2014.
When the Russians invaded Crimea.
That's it, yeah, and Eastern Ukraine. And and at that point, I just thought, I've just turned 30, and I just felt it in my bones. And actually, I spoke to my mom, and my mom said, just wait a little bit. I think she meant it in a way of, not that she didn't think I was wise enough, or a good enough writer or anything like that, but I don't know, that was her instinct. She was like, maybe you should wait a bit. And I was actually at the very beginning of my cookery career as well. It was my first cookbook was published in 2015, but I did start taking the first steps towards it. So I started recording my interviews with my family. So when everybody would get together in Ukraine around this massive table, eating, drinking, shouting, really. And I just started putting my phone or dictaphone there and just recording all of this mayhem, this beautiful mayhem.
Atmosphere.
Yeah. And so, so kind of did bits and bobs for the 10 years. And then when 2022, the full-scale invasion happened, and I just thought, okay, this is time, and I just, I was 38 when I started writing it, and I was like, I'm nearly there. And the reason why I wanted to write it was because I wanted people to understand what's going on, because I feel like there's so much noise in the media and online. People tend to look at us sometimes through headlines and dots on a map. So even people who love history and reading and think that they know about Ukraine, I've heard people say, oh, it's a conflict and it started in, 22 or 2014. I'm like, no, it didn't. It's been going on for centuries. And I really wanted people to read the book to understand it through this emotional landscape, so to speak, through my family's history, and also these very intimate kind of zoomed in interactions, rather than this kind of zooming out thing,
the big, not the big global history conversation, but through the lens of one family's lineage.
Yeah, or not even through Ukraine's history, it's just going in and kind of just hopefully feeling what we felt. And I don't know, maybe that would make people more empathetic and even maybe help us more. I know that might be wishful thinking, and maybe some people will read the book and be like, oh my God, okay, I understand now. And then okay, but I don't know. So that was the reason I wanted people to understand and to empathize, and also maybe to relate from that, because everybody, I feel like, maybe we've forgotten a little bit, but so many people in the UK, their parents have gone through the Blitz and have experienced so many things in the 1940s. The whole thing about the carry on thing. Mm-hmm. Ukrainians started using it a lot. This phrase, calm down and carry on, or stay with Ukraine and carry on. You know what I mean? That kind of stoicism. So I thought maybe if people in the UK will read it, that something will jolt, and they'll also connect to their own histories in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did you feel like, in talking to your family and learning more about, your grandmothers and their heritage, what did you learn about yourself in that process?
You know what? Delving deep into those stories, which I'd known since childhood, really, but really kind of exploring them as a 38, 39, 40-year-old woman, it made me relate to them so much more. It made me connect to them on a much deeper level. And it gave me strength because I thought, oh my God, if my 11-year-old grandmother, who was deported to God knows where with her mom and her siblings, to the edge of Russia in the middle of winter, thrown out into the forest, left there to die. If she survived that, they managed to return to Ukraine. Then there was the Second World War and the Nazi occupation. And then there was 70-year Soviet occupation, really, because that's what it was. If they survived that, managed to remain strong and humane and kind, then we can all survive it. What's happening now with, the global support and everything else. So they give me strength, all of those stories.
Because you come from the most incredible line of women. I suppose what I thought was not that we don't actually all many of us come from strong women, but we don't know their stories. And actually anybody listening to this who listens to it regularly will know I quite often say that I am absolutely fascinated by our grandmother's stories. I mean, when we were talking when I was feeding my face, we touched on a bit about, which we'll go on to talk about menopause and stuff in a bit, but about what menopause must have been like for the previous generations. And I just think there was so much, well, firstly, their stories weren't told, but there was so, like you say, so much stoicism and so much, this is just what we have to do. I'm really glad that you were able to ask some questions at a point when people were still there to tell you the answers.
Yeah. And, I try not to have any regrets in life. Everything happened as it did, but I almost wish that I was a little bit older when my grandmothers went, or if they lived longer, that would be even better. And I could have asked them so many more questions.
How old were they when they died and you?
I was 19 when my grandmother Lucia, my maternal grandmother, died. And in 2018 or 19, I think my paternal grandmother Vera died. And I was, mid-30s then. And I did manage to do a bit more with Vera, because I actually knew a lot more about my maternal grandmother. My grandmother Vera was actually from Siberia. She lived in Ukraine her whole life and considered herself to be a Ukrainian, but came to Ukraine with my granddad, who's Ukrainian, after they lived briefly in Uzbekistan in 1959 when my dad was 1. And she lived in Ukraine until she died in 2019. And she was incredible. She was like one of the kindest people that I'd known. And but I didn't know much about her story. She never, ever talked about Siberia, really. She never went back there. Her family came and visited, but she never went back there. And I felt like there were a lot of things that she didn't talk about. So before she died, I did sit down with her and I asked her gently, please, can you tell me your story? And actually it was such a difficult story to tell that it was almost like it wasn't her telling her. She was so kind of rigid and it was just really interesting and strange thing, the way she told us. Like maybe there was so much trauma that
went into another place in order to tell you it.
Maybe I still, and she cried and she, especially when she talked about her child. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was, I still have her voice on my phone. I don't know how, because I'm so kind of like, I lose my phones and whatever. And I actually managed to keep somehow, maybe thank you, iCloud.
Like
but I
you
managed
say
to keep those
you're
things.
disorganized. You've been saying that ever since I got here. But this room, you can tell that you're not disorganized. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it. But I bet you can put your hand on absolutely anything you want at any time.
Yeah, I guess so. There are better days than others. And in my work, I'm actually I go into that completely in my work as in my cooking. If I'm working in a restaurant, especially, I become almost OCD, which is really weird because I'm just like, oh, I just realized when I did my retraining and was training to be a chef, I realized that if I don't keep everything clear and really extremely anally almost organized, I will not be able to do this job and I will absolutely fail and they will just kick me out of this restaurant kind of thing. So I've trained myself and my brain. I almost like become a different person. I know that it might sound strange, but I become this really together, organized person. And it doesn't mean that and then I have a really good time with it as well. And I'm actually very nice to work with, I've been told. So I'm not shouty or, if I'm leading a kitchen somewhere, it's all, I can achieve that kind of like Zen thing where everything is in its place. And me and the people that I work with is just nice. And we're just having a nice time.
Which doesn't sound like a typical kitchen.
No. And I guess witnessing how it can be also kind of just like instilled in me that I want to be a very gentle presence in the kitchen, even if I'm the leader, like, so to speak, if I'm the head chefing something, because I do events. I don't work in restaurants anymore, but I still do pop-ups and stuff like that. And so yeah, I like it to be really nice and chilled. And I'm a great believer, and I think that's what comes from my grandmothers, but especially Lucia, who was this incredible cook, that you can feel if the food has been cooked with a certain energy. And, you know, with people say with love, and some people say like, oh, yeah, that expression, you know, whatever. But what does that mean? In my view, it means that you're cooking with attention, really. That's what love is, and calmness. And if you're calm and attentive, and sometimes intention as well, I'm a great believer in this kind of intuitive and in cooking with intention, where you have nice thoughts and it's so kind of, and then you can feel it in the cooking. I don't know. I think you can really feel the love and care, and it's not a bad thing when you're feeding someone. So yeah.
But how did you go from, because you were a journalist, weren't you? So what was the decision making to make your career in food? And change that, because there's something I've scribbled down that is in the book. So cooking was like a drug until you decided to turn it into your profession.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
So I grew up in a family of incredible cooks, including my dad. It's actually interesting. Like, my mom is, again, like, learned from her mother, and she does all these incredible things. Like, she can stretch phyllo dough and like spin it around in the air. Like, honestly, like, some chefs that I know can't do the stuff that my mom can. And my dad is more like Joe, who's like just throws things together and experiments and stuff like that. So they were all incredible, including obviously my grandmothers. But I didn't cook. Actually, I was like, ugh, I don't want to do that. I was a teenager or a kid or whatever. I'm like, I'm not interested. And at some point, my mom and dad were like, oh, maybe you should learn. And like, maybe mom can give you some lessons on Sunday. They weren't too pushy about it. And it wasn't about like, you're a woman, so you must cook. They just both saw, like, they thought that it would be a really good life skill, I think.
Did your brother cook?
Not when he was a teenager, but he's a very good cook now. But I burnt everything. I did it with my mom, and it was just like horrible. And my mom was like, "Ugh, it's not time for you. It's fine." My mom was like, "Just let's let it go. You know, it's okay." And then I started cooking in my late teens at university, really, when I was alone and when I was here in the UK. And for me, it was that point when I started cooking, and especially when I started making some Ukrainian food. I'm so close to my family. It made me feel so much closer to them. And maybe that's when things started turning in my head, and all of these synapses or whatever it is just started firing up and bringing me a lot of this kind of like feeling of pleasure. So in my early 20s, I just became obsessed. Like, it became a real special interest, like, to the point of, you know.
So it was a link to home.
Oh, 100% to my family. Yeah. So I was just, and I wasn't necessarily cooking Ukrainian food all the time. Once I started cooking, I was actually really interested in cooking Italian, Asian curries I've discovered here in the UK, where I've never tried them in Ukraine or Cyprus, where I lived as well. So I was just like cooking obsessively. And then the financial crisis of 2009, 8 or 9. And I didn't lose my job. Like, there were loads of redundancies, but I thought that I might be next on the redundancy list. So I went to my editor and was like, I decided to go and retrain to be a chef. And he said, like, yeah, you should do it. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for being honest, you know.
Good decision, though. Good decision, because now you're not in an industry that's dying.
People
always need to eat.
It wasn't like the easiest path to take either. Working in, at restaurants, you worked for below minimum wage often, and it was a really tough environment.
Were you about 30 then?
I was 26 when I went to retrain, and then I had my son very unexpectedly when I was 28.
Oh, and, terrible timing.
Yeah. Well, it was all very intense, but I kind of just, especially after I had my son, I just had this boost of this. I can't even describe it what it was. It was some kind of crazy energy and creative energy as well. And this drive, but not drive, like, I'm not very good at selling myself, or like, I'm not ambitious. I've never been kind of like ambitious in that sense, like, oh, I know, this is my aim. I'm going to write this book, or I'm going to do this. No, I've never really believed in it's that kind of very common thing for women. Even now, I still have an imposter syndrome sometimes. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm working on it, and I know, and I respect my work, and I'm teaching myself and learning how to appreciate myself a lot more. But even back then, I was like, oh, if I used to say, like, if I have to peel vegetables until I die, and it's like a very kind of not very well-paid job, but I'm in the kitchen and I'm doing this, I'm going to be in a very good space. Because even in restaurants, when it was a really tough environment in terms of, all sorts of kind of dynamics, unhealthy dynamics between chefs and staff and management and whatever, they bring me a box of chilies and I'd go into a trance and I'd start doing it. And for me and my brain, it was a meditation. And it actually did wonders for my mental health, even if I was working 18-hour days, like from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m.
Were you still able to do that? Was that before your son was born, or were you?
Yeah, this really intense period was just before my son was born. And it was tough, and in equal measure, it was, it just made me realize that I don't want to do anything else, or I will always be cooking and it will always give me this strength. And now thinking back and having written the memoir, I also feel the connection to my grandmothers, basically. Like my grandmother Lucy, and I mentioned it in the book, she taught us to be very observant without knowing it. She didn't set out to teach us this, which is a very useful trait to have if you're a writer. But when she would tell us a recipe, she wouldn't just tell us, boil this, do this, see you later, She would even encourage us to listen to things.
I noticed that in the book. That's so interesting. Listen to it.
And her language was so poetic in a way. She used to say, "Коли набереться духом," which meant like when the stew had enough spirit in it, soul in it. And she meant when it was on a hard boil, that's when you put like these fluffy dumplings in. You know what I mean? Like, so it really, it just all kind of came together.
So it's all about the feeling, all about the senses.
Yeah, absolutely.
This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. When I think back to starting The Shift, I can hardly believe I pulled it off. I mean, I knew nothing, and I had to figure it all out on my own. Scripts, scheduling, branding. When you're starting something new, it can seem like every time you tick something off your to-do list, 2 more things magically appear in their place. So finding a tool that simplifies the whole process can be a real game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Heinz to Allbirds and Skims. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify will help you build an online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful tools to write product descriptions, headlines, and enhance product photography. Get the word out like you actually have a marketing team to create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from inventory to international shipping to processing returns, you name it. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your £1 a month trial at shopify.co.uk/shift. Go to shopify.co.uk/shift. One thing that really struck me was you were talking about, cooking and when Russia invaded Ukraine at the beginning of 2022, that you lost the ability to cook.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even describe what it felt like. It was like I was taken out of my body, the amount of stress. I literally felt like, and I mean it, I felt like my head, whatever is inside is going to explode out of me. That's the level of stress that I went through, especially when, we found out what kind of atrocities happening in occupied areas. And my parents were, my hometown was occupied and is still occupied. And, there were a couple of days when I couldn't reach them and I just completely lost it. So I couldn't cook, I couldn't eat. Like I couldn't eat anything for months. I had to I had this acquaintance, she's not even really a close friend, but she's an acquaintance, and Amy Poon, this amazing Chinese chef. And she started sending me in the post this medicinal Chinese broth, which was literally just the liquid and maybe some medicinal Chinese mushrooms. And I was just sipping that. And that's what I sustained myself. And maybe Joe would force some chickpeas into me from time to time. So I couldn't eat. And then I couldn't cook. And I just thought, maybe I wasn't thinking then, but later on I thought, oh my God, it felt like I lost my superpower. Cooking is a superpower to me because, as I mentioned, this kind of quality of the meditative quality for me is what's keeping my mental health strong. That's what keeps on helping me to survive. And when I just thought, oh my goodness, I've lost it. But then it changed. It changed when I saw my parents for the first time.
And that was when they managed to get out of Ukraine and you met them in Italy, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah. So they, it took them 5 days to drive through Europe and to get into Italy, where both of my cousins have been living in Germany for the years and years and years. And my cousin bought a house, one of those kind of dilapidating houses that you find a lot in Italy, in northern Italy, and it was empty. So he just said, "Why don't you just go there and you'll have space and you'll be safe and you can just recuperate and decide what to do next." And as soon as they set out, I was like, right, I bought a flight because I didn't want them to come into this house that was cold. It was April and it was still cold in northern Italy, and that was damp and there was no one there, and I just felt so sad. So obviously I wanted to see them and to squeeze them, and I flew out ahead of them. And I went to this Italian supermarket and was trying to find beetroot and dill and all of these familiar flavors.
Beetroot, not a big Italian
vegetable. It really isn't. So I made them this massive, really oversized pot of borscht. And the kitchen became steamy, and there was this sound of kind of susurration of this broth on the hob, and I was there, and there were some little snacks and cold beers, and I just waited for them, and that's how I and that was the first time that I cooked since the full-scale invasion, and I loved it again, and I was like, oh, and I was chopping the cabbage, and I didn't cry that time, and I was like, oh, I can actually chop the cabbage now again, and you know what? The funniest thing is, when we sat down on that, was like, oh, you really should take some lessons from Mom in borscht making. And I was like, but it was.
Thanks, Dad.
Me and my mom exchanged looks and rolled our eyes. The cabbage got overcooked. The beetroot wasn't good enough, but I found it funny at that point. Normally I would get really pissed off with him, but I just thought of oh, it's okay, Dad.
Yeah, you just had a long journey. I'll let you just this once, but don't make a habit of it.
No. No, he's not like that, really. My dad actually, I feel, has been kind of a feminist without really knowing what it is, if that makes sense. Not fully kind of realized it, but he's always been extremely supportive of me, of my education, and of especially after university, of my work. He always said, don't work for anyone else. You just work for yourself. Be independent. When I was a single mom, he was like, that's okay. You don't need anyone, you're fine. He's always hired, when he had his factory in Ukraine, all of these women that worked for him then went on to create their own businesses and everything like that. So actually in many ways he and still has this real strong respect for women. And I think partly because he was a son of a single mother. So Vera did end up divorcing his dad, who was actually quite violent.
And he was her second husband, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, she had quite a few.
Yeah. Oh, Vera. She sounds like a legend.
She was an absolute legend, and she was a really good mom, and she was a very strong woman. And I think my dad kind of, and I think maybe that's why he was drawn to my mom as well, because my mom was always like, she didn't take any shit, it's okay. But yeah, sometimes he slips out with shit it's fine.
So being descended from those women and having that model, I suppose, how has that affected your approach to getting older? I mean, you're like, what are you, 41?
Oh, going to be 41 soon. Yeah, in a couple of months.
Nearly 41 by the time this comes out. And you look about 12. So it feels ridiculous asking you about getting older, but, you know.
And it's extremely genuine. I actually find older women extremely interesting and beautiful. So I'm looking forward to it, genuinely. I'm like, if I actually asked my husband, I'm like, is that a grey hair? And he's like, oh, yeah, it is. I'm like, yes. Like, I don't know. I love your hair. I just love, I'm like, I'm going to be one of those women that are going to have really long white hair, I hope. Although I've got my dad's hair and he's still, he's white now, but he wasn't for a while. And then, and I'm going to wear like all of this like black velvet and like embroidered black velvet. I'm just going to like look so cool. I'm already kind of like moving. My hair is not white, and I love faces and with wrinkles, necks with wrinkles, hands with wrinkles. It's absolutely beautiful. Like I'm looking forward to it. Maybe once I'm there and I'm like, fuck my back, my knees, whatever. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to not, to being not very well, maybe. But in terms of the wisdom that I hope that I'm going to have, and how much more interesting I'm going to become, and I'm looking forward to it.
There's something that you wrote that really made me think about that. So I think it was your grandmother Vera saying she was night beauty, your mum was day beauty, and you were morning beauty.
Yeah.
And I just thought that is such a lovely message to be sending.
Yeah, and yeah, I know we just always said it, and we always kind of like it was like an inner joke between the three of us. It was just our thing, and yeah, and Vera always said it. So yeah. Night, so she said, your age, your life is like a day, different seasons or the different times of day. And she said, the message was that we will always be beautiful, whether you're night, day, or morning beauty,
I love that. That's so lovely.
Me too. I guess both of my grandmothers were quite poetic.
I really thought that. It was really like, there were parts of the book, and it was obviously it's your writing as well as their stories, but there's a real fairy tale quality to so much of it.
It was interesting when I was writing the book. I interviewed quite a lot of my family members, despite how hard it was for them, obviously, because the war kind of raged on during. But my cousin Ira, who's actually one of my role models, she's a cousin, but we don't say that. Oh, she's my sister, really, and she's in her 50s, and she's a psychologist, but she's studying how to be a psychiatrist in Germany, and she's just incredible. And when I interviewed her, she said that when she was little and she heard all of those stories about Lucia, including the deportation and war and all of those things, and she said, they were really kind of like scary things, but she said it almost felt like a Gothic fairy tale. And it was that kind of like, I'm a little bit scared, but I'm also extremely kind of like fascinated and interested. And yeah, I don't know. And when she said that the Gothic fairy tale, I'm like, oh, damn right. Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Definitely quite Gothic if you think about Brothers Grimm.
Yeah, really, really Gothic.
Yeah.
I mean, in amongst all of this, the invasion and your parents' house being taken over by polite green men, as you put it.
Yeah.
And then, you're then getting out and I should say to anybody who doesn't know that your brother's in the army, joined up immediately, didn't he? And your mother now lives in Germany, but your father went back. In amongst all this, your periods just stopped, and you were like 38.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So I have two kids. My oldest son, who's from another partner, previous partner, and me and Joe, my husband Joe.
I like that part.
I was married in my 20s. That's why I said that. Yeah, I had a husband before. So we have Wilfred, and we wanted to have another baby. And because Lucia had 6, and not that I wanted 6, but Lucia had 6, and all kind of, I think, planned. But I just understood her kind of like drive to create life. And I guess even after the invasion happened, I was like, we were still like, oh, maybe we'll try for another baby. I know it sounds crazy, but
no, it doesn't at all.
But I just thought, okay. And then the full-scale invasion happened. And within a couple of months, my periods just abruptly, completely stopped. And I was like, okay, I've heard about this before, that in great kind of like stress, it can happen. And I started asking my Ukrainian friends, both who are in Ukraine and in diaspora, because we were all kind of going through different kind of trauma. And I said, is it happening to you? And a lot of them said yes. Even the ones that were in their early 30s, they were like, yep, my period stopped. So I was like, okay, it will come back.
It's a stress thing, yeah.
And then it didn't. And then in 7-8 months, I think it was November, we found out that my youngest son, Wilfred, actually had this genetic condition called Fragile X syndrome. And
did you know it was in your family at that point?
No, I didn't know what it was. I'd never even heard of it. I knew there was something up with Wilfred from pretty much age, 8 months. And I kept on like really fighting for him, and with professionals and actually friends and family as well, because they were like, no, he's fine. He will speak, he will walk. Don't worry. And I'm like, no, my motherly intuition says something is wrong and I need to know what it is. So I thought it was autism. And then, we found out that it was Fragile X. And that was a huge imagine after the war and everything else. And it's like, here you go, another like blow over the head, basically what it felt like. I was being bludgeoned. And then they also said cherry on the cake. And they said, oh, did your periods stop at all? Do you still have your periods? And I said, no. And they were like, you need to get yourself tested for Fragile X. I'm like, what? But I'm fine. I don't have an intellectual disability, which, my son has. I don't, I'm fine. And they were like, no. So basically with that, you can get a condition that's called premature ovarian insufficiency. 50% of women get it with that permutation. And I did my test and it came back, saying that, yeah, I'm pretty much very much a permutation carrier, quite a lot of repeats of this kind of broken gene. And then actually we went to an IVF kind of clinic to see if I can quickly try and, because even though I never really wanted to do that, I was like, I never thought that would be for me. But so we went and they looked at my ovaries basically, and they said, you're supposed to have at this age about 15 follicles, and you have 2 or 3. And then they tested me for my hormones, and it came back as basically full-on menopause. So menopause is the symptom of POI. So that's the condition, and menopause is the symptom of it. And so I found out that I was in a full-blown
space of 1 year. There was the full-on invasion. Then you found out that Wilf had Fragile X. And then you found out that you were the carrier. And you were, as my gynecologist put it, all out of eggs. And you were menopausal.
When it rains, it pours, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I thought, okay, so how can I help myself? And they also, to be fair to them, they were like, you have to go on HRT. Because if it starts so early, if you don't, your bone density is just going to go and you're going to really suffer.
So were you 38 at this point?
I was 38, yeah. And I actually, the NHS stuff would have taken ages to see a specialist. And I was like, there's no way I can wait for a specialist. I needed this now. So I found this amazing doctor. She worked for both NHS and privately, who had POI herself, and she's written a book about it. And immediately she was like, right, she's prescribed something. It actually didn't really work, that treatment, the first treatment that I got. I still felt, it actually was so hard to figure out what was war trauma, what was worrying about my son, what's menopause, but I did feel this fog. But again, trauma can do that as well. So sometimes I would walk down the street and it literally felt like I was wading through air. It was hard to lift. It felt really strange, really awful. And eventually the NHS actually came back, and I saw a specialist at one of the hospitals, and they prescribed what I'm on now, a spray.
Just HRT.
Yeah, so I was on HRT, the tablets, the 2 split ones.
Yeah.
But then they prescribed this spray and the progesterone kind of capsules. And actually that regime, yeah. And pretty much within 5 days, or like, I don't know, I can't remember now, a week or something, I was like, feel a little bit more like myself again.
People are now talking about menopause, but it's very rare for people to talk about it happening, so young. So much isn't decided. in your life.
And I've heard, in your podcast, sometimes you talk about, or what was it like for your mom and your grandmother, and I come from women. So my mom said that hers didn't start until her late 50s.
Yeah.
And she still went on HRT. And at that point, I all of the media in the UK was like, HRT, cancer, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, Mom, no, don't do this. In England, they say this. And she's like, Olia, calm down. I'm a pharmacist. Like, I know I'm a medical professional. I know what I'm doing. Like,
good point.
And it's, I feel good with it. And it's the end of story. Like, you don't have to worry about this. And I was like, fine. And I actually backed off and, really. And I was like, what about grandma? Like, do you feel like she, went through it? And she was like, it did happen. Like, she remembers, but she said also it was kind of like light. It wasn't like awful.
She was lucky.
There wasn't this like a sweats or whatever, or I don't know. So my whole life, my whole adult life, I thought that I'll be
like another 20 years.
Yeah.
As well.
I thought, my cousin that I just mentioned, she had her baby at like one at 22, one in her 30s, and one in her mid 40s. So she has this
God.
So I was like, me and Joe definitely can have another baby, and it's okay. I've made my peace with it. I'm actually I feel like having learned that, I'm actually quite lucky to have the two boys that I have. I'm grateful for that every single day, because I think it was some kind of a fluke, because I've had these very small follicles since I was 20. I went to a gynecologist in Ukraine, actually, and I was like, oh my God, she was like very rude and like in the Soviet way. She was like, you have follicles of a 40-year-old woman. I was like 25. And I was like, what? I was like, this is so,
so because of the way it was delivered, you didn't really absorb it?
I didn't, and I did. And then I actually went off my pill. I was like, well, if I can't have any children anyway, then I won't. And then I got pregnant with Sasha. So, and he didn't have Fragile X. So everything was really weird in the way that it happened, but I'm very grateful and it's all good.
Is Fragile X a thing in your family? Because you're a carrier.
My dad and possibly Vera was a carrier, or it may have been also a spontaneous thing. So it can happen kind of like, out of the blue, or my grandma could have carried it, and it becomes worse with each generation, if that makes sense. So the more you pass it on, the more severe it becomes. And unfortunately, Wilfred is the most affected.
But Wilfred still loves to cook.
He does. He's an amazing, it was a really real grieving process. You think that your child's future is going to go in one way, and then you learn about his condition and realize that he will probably never be fully independent or have a family or go to university or any of these things that you've dreamt in your head that he's going to have. And it was really difficult for a very long time. But I think I've accepted it. I'm in the process of accepting it, but obviously because I'm tearful now. And but I've also, I'm there to fight for him. I'm there to spread the word. The Fragile X Society UK asked me to be their ambassador, and that's what I'm doing now. So I'm shouting everywhere about it, both about how it affects women and how it affects children, because actually quite a lot of people that have children with autism don't even realize that it's actually a comorbidant of Fragile X. And a lot of women that are going through early menopause, well, hopefully in the UK, they are quite good and they say like, oh, let's test you genetically. But in other countries, they don't. There's no research on Fragile X, or they don't know it, or they don't test it. And so many people are in the complete, I call it like before I knew what it was, or when the first time when we found out, there was the NHS. I love them so much, but sometimes, there are cases and they were just like, okay, go to Fragile X Society. Like, we don't really know much about it. Or like there wasn't this support. And I can just, I don't know. I can just imagine what it's like for other women in other countries. That's why I kind of try to really talk about it and shout about it. And, I have a big platform on my Instagram, and women, it's 75% women, I think, or even 80% women that follow me there. So I'm like, if this is your thing, like, test yourself. Maybe it will help you. But it's like it feels like being just your head above this really massive ocean, and you're there very much alone and just flapping about, and you don't know what to do. But I know what to do now. And that's the good news.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Did you have like an inner activist before the invasion? Because your immediate reaction to the invasion was to start raising money for the Ukrainian troops, is too strong a word, really, wasn't it? And to raise money for them to get kit and everything. Was that, and now this is your immediate reaction as well to Wilf having fragile legs. Were you always, like, did you always have an inner activist, or is that something you think that's come from the war?
Yeah, I think so. I never thought of myself as an activist before that. I always thought that it had to be kind of like war related or something like that. But when I started writing my memoir, my mother's sister, Zhenya, was my primary school teacher. She actually taught all of us, like my brother, my cousins, whatever. You know, she worked at the school number 2 in my hometown called Kakhovka. And she was just incredible. She kind of, I know that it doesn't really matter, but to me, like when I was little, she looked timeless. You know, she had this kind of like finger wave, like bob her whole life. You know, she had a style. She had like a thing. When she started getting older, you know, we were all like, dye your hair, you know, at the time, you know, like, and she was like, no, I really like my white hair and I'm just going to keep it. But most importantly, she was an activist. And once I started interviewing my cousin Ira, who I mentioned twice already, when I started interviewing her, I realized that my auntie was actually an activist. You know, she was not only a teacher, but she was head of this kind of municipal board for education or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. And she was fighting for a change in the education system. She wanted to eradicate the old Soviet system that we still had in the 90s. She taught us how to think critically. That was like even like as primary school children, because during the Soviet Union, it was all like, you know, for my parents' generation, their first lesson of every Monday of the first day of the week was the political education. And it was literally just propaganda, just being like fed to you in a tube. You know what I mean? Like it was really hard. I can imagine for people to keep that free thinking, you know, and it was very dangerous to have that free thinking. But in the 90s, obviously, we started, you know, we were able to do that. And she was very, very powerful in that. And she taught us how to question things and how to really think in a different way, you know, and to, So thinking kind of like made me feel really connected to her. And maybe some of the things that I've done, like, oh, maybe we're similar people, you know?
There's a scene in the book, isn't there, where she refuses to let the children in her class do, I can't remember what it's called, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so in like the Hitler's Youth, basically in the Soviet Union, you had Oktyabrята, which is like the little Octobrists. That's kind of like, so it's like a club, almost like, they stole it from the Americans, to be honest, the Soviets. It was like Scouts, but Soviet, but much more political. Like we were also like, I am a Soviet citizen, and you know, it was very much like this really weird dystopian vibe, if you know what I mean. And everybody had to wear these red handkerchiefs, like kerchiefs on their neck and everything. And then you become a pioneer, young pioneer, and then you become a komsomolets, you know, in the university. So there were all of these. So you got institutionalized and politicized very early on. And we were supposed to become these Oktyabrята, you know, and it was 1991, 6 months before Ukraine fully became independent. So it was like this point in history that was, you know, it was on the kind of on the edge.
Yeah, I mean, the whole of what was happening in Eastern Europe at that point, but so many countries were, I don't know whether seceding is the right word, you know. The wall had come down, you know.
Exactly, and we were on the brink of kind of like, you know, becoming independent, but not quite. So we were still the Soviet, so I still went to school when the Soviet Union was still there. And and I saw her. I was in the school yard, and I didn't really have many friends at that point, so I was alone, and I was like just standing there, and I saw her very close. I could actually like pricked up my ears and was listening. And she wasn't talking to the headmaster. She was actually quite a gentle, you know, He was very tall, but he was kind of like, well, at least in that moment, I remember him as really cowering, even though she was quite, she was like a small height. And
but forceful.
But forceful. And she was just like, my children will not become these Oktyabrята, which the inauguration would happen on the anniversary of this, Bolshevik revolution in October. So it was coming up. And she was like really like telling him really strongly. And I remember him saying like, what about the other class? Like that teacher is going to go through with it. And she's like, well, my children are not. It's over. She said, it's over. And like, I don't think she stomped her foot, but in my imagination, she stomped her foot. And for me, it was like, on the one hand, I was like, oh my God, I will never be, this
you
thing.
won't be little October.
No. And I was like, oh my God, like, but I really wanted to have this responsibility and be in this group. And it would be so cool, because we were so conditioned to believe that it was an amazingly cool thing. And then the other part of me was like, wow, who's the headmaster here? And it gave me this kind of like, like I was proud. I was like, oh my God, my auntie, like really, she kicks ass.
It's so interesting. All these amazing women giving you good lessons from a very small age. You speak 4 languages, don't you? But until you were in your 30s, one of those wasn't Ukrainian.
So I'd always known Ukrainian in a sense of I always understood it fully, but because Russian was my first language, just a very quick explanation, in the south and eastern Ukraine, like the closer you were to the center of Moscow, the closer you were to Russia, the harsher was the Russification program. So we were
you're from very close to the border with Crimea, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm from a very, very, very Russified part. Yeah, Kherson region, right? That's right. So, in my mom's generation, if you spoke Ukrainian at school, you were bullied and you were by Ukrainians. We were just indoctrinated to think that Ukrainian language is a peasant language. The language of no perspective is what it was called. So if you spoke Ukrainian, you will never go to university. You will never go to university. You will never have the better job, or you will never succeed. So I understood it. I could read it, etc., but I couldn't speak. I didn't have the confidence. Like as soon as I started speaking it, Russian just came out, because obviously there are similarities, But so it was really after the full-scale invasion when I said, okay, enough of excuses. Oh, it's too hard. Oh, it's okay. I was just like, you know what? Fuck this shit. I'm going to learn my language. I'm going to learn the language of my ancestors, and I'm going to, and I'm going to speak it really, really well. I'm just going to do it. And I did. And a really good way of doing it was listening to Ukrainian podcasts. I love podcasts. I'm such a huge fan of yours, by the way. I'm like totally fangirling you. But so I learned through listening, and now I'm fluent. And I've even been on Ukrainian TV recently, and I was pretty damn good speaking it. I was quite proud of myself.
It's so interesting, isn't it? That the way that language was used to control you, really, by saying your native language was not important. It was nothing.
No.
And there's a moment in the book where you say that when you were growing up, you thought that you came from nowhere, that where you came from was unimportant. But we're seeing now just how important it is.
Yeah. It was, there's even Ukraine, it's a new kind of Ukrainian thing, menshovartist. Our ingrained, self-deprecation is not the right word. What's the word when you're really putting yourself down all the time?
It is self-deprecating.
But I feel like it can be quite it's more than that. Yeah, it's like when you think really lowly of yourself, when you're not only like for a joke you self-deprecate. Menshovartist, like your value, you have no value. What's that word? It's
like you've got no self-esteem.
No self-esteem, that kind of very low self-esteem that's ingrained in us. And there's like a thing online where it's like, guys, like watch this thing, like this is Menshovartist, don't say this, say this. Like we need to reprogram ourselves almost and just gain that confidence in how incredible our culture is, how amazing our language is, etc. So it's like a collective effort now, I think. It's really interesting to observe.
And do your parents speak Ukrainian?
My mom, you know what? They shifted. I don't know if my dad is fully all the time speaking Ukrainian, but that's fine. He can do whatever the hell he wants. He's building a minesweeper in Ukraine, so I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
But my mom and if we speak the 4 of us, so we have like a family WhatsApp video call almost every week, and we speak Ukrainian. And the more we do it, the more it feels like second nature, and it's amazing.
I should ask you the questions that I always
course.
ask now. I mean, really, I would like to talk to you for a whole afternoon, but best not. What is your emotional age?
Okay, so when I was growing up, when I was little, I guess in English that would be called a precocious child. Is
Precocious,
that precocious child? But my family said like, oh, you were like born at the age of 60. Like you're a 60-year-old girl, like in a really positive way. That like they'll tell me like, oh, I'm so wise and I'm so like clever or whatever, you know. So actually, they kind of ingrained this idea into me. That's why I'm like, sometimes I say like, oh, I'm gonna be my age when I reach 60. I'm just moving towards that now. But having said that, sometimes when I'm upset and I become really dysregulated, I really become a little girl, and sometimes I'm a freaking 8-year-old in emotional age when I can't. There are moments when I have like meltdowns, and that's when I'm like, oh God, that was really like Wilfred could have done a better job controlling myself at that point. You know, you just like have like I just can't. So I don't know. 8 going on 60, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so interesting.
Nothing in between. It's either all or nothing for me. That's the type of person that I am.
I love that question so much, though. The answers are always so fascinating. I interviewed someone else today who said they were born at 45.
Interesting.
Give us a book recommendation. Can it be anything, any type of book from any stage of your life?
There's a really incredible book that has come out recently by an author called Victoria Melina, and it's called Looking at Women, Looking at War. And she was a children's author and a novelist, and she organized this incredible literature festival in a place called New York, but it was in eastern Ukraine, Donetsk region. She was just amazing. And after the full-scale invasion, she became a war crime investigator. And she was killed by the Russians, I believe a couple of years ago now. She was blown up. She was in a restaurant in eastern Ukraine and they sent a missile there and a lot of people were killed there that day. And basically a couple of amazing Ukrainian editors found her, she was she was already in the process of writing this book. But she had very rough kind of notes. And it's a really interesting book, obviously, because of the incredible work and her writing style, and she's just amazing. But also they left quite a few of her notes as they were. It's such an interesting glimpse into almost how her process, or how she conducted her process. And it's just that I think it's a really important book to read. And I avoided reading it for ages because I was like, oh, am I strong enough to read it? But actually, once I started reading it, I was like, oh my God, it's fine. I can do it. I finished it. And so this is my recommendation. Looking at Women, Looking at War is an incredible piece of work.
What advice would you give younger women?
I'm actually learning quite a lot from young women now, especially young Ukrainian women, even teenagers. They are just, I'm like, a lot of the time, I'm like, I actually tell them something like, oh my God, I wish I was like you at your age. Like, do you have a boyfriend? I don't need a fucking boyfriend. Do you have no, I'm concentrating on my work right now, I'm doing this, I'm doing, and it's like, I have so much hope in this new generation of women, I'm aware that there are still girls and young women the same as I was, which was slightly naive, maybe, or like very open, very trusting. And my advice is to develop a very good sociopath radar.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because a lot of my boyfriends and long-term boyfriends now I realize were sociopaths. So my advice, stop. If he's love bombing you and then it's all terrible and you're the worst person in the world, if they're telling you you're nothing without me or you're trying to be me, run for the hills. Try and recognize early on. Don't get yourself sucked in, especially if you're the type of person who, I don't know if I have a savior complex or whatever it is, but I'm very kind of like motherly and I'm like, I just want to help you. And, but I had this beautiful childhood and yours was so broken. So it means that I have to save you and make you feel better. Like, I'm sorry, but so this kind of like psychopath / sociopath radar is something that I'd advise.
Who is your old bird role model?
Maybe it's a bit of a cop-out. Definitely the women in my family.
Yeah, it's not a cop-out.
But if I had to say someone who's not from my family, it would be a poet called Lina Kostenko. She's like Ukrainian national treasure almost. And she's now 95. And she was part of the 1960s. They were called the 60ers. She was part of the 1960s dissident Ukrainian movement.
I think I saw you talk about her on your Instagram.
She's just incredible. Her poetry is amazing, and she was doing a lot of activism. So I think, and I've been reading a lot about her recently, and there are so many women like that. There's another called Alla Horska, she was actually murdered by the Soviets in the 60s because she uncovered these graves where they killed lots of people. It's a fascinating story, and she was an incredible artist. And she was also a Russian speaker who'd switched to Ukrainian in the 60s. And I just saw, Alla Horska and Lina Kostenko. I highly recommend for listeners to seek them out if they don't know about them. They're incredible women that should be talked about more.
I was thinking just as when I asked you that question, I did think we've probably talked about your role models for about half of this conversation. Anyway. Yeah. What's your superpower?
I think, I've always thought that empathy was my superpower, even though my mom is always my mom always worries about me. She says, she's like, Olia, you put everyone's shit, everything around you through yourself. And she's constantly just and she always told me don't be like that, or try to just not put all of these things through yourself. Don't feel everything around you. And I'm like, but this is the way that I am. I can't engineer myself to feel less. But so I think that actually empathy, I think it was freaking Elon Musk that said recently, empathy is the weakness of the 21st century, of people in the 21st century. And I'm like, so I went and I bought that amazing tile that says empathy is life. But I am following my mom's advice in that I'm trying to take better care of myself and actually to maybe try and curb that superpower a little bit. But yeah, that's what came into my head for the first time.
And cooking.
Oh, and cooking. Of course, yeah.
And last one, how many fucks do you give?
Too many, still. I'm working on it as well. Not in the sense of I don't give a shit about how I look or about aging, as I said. Genuinely don't give a shit. I've learned how to give less fucks when it comes to friendships. So if somebody doesn't want to be my friend, before I'd be flapping about oh, why don't they like me? Or, but I want to be your friend and you don't. I'm and I actually came to that in my late 20s, early 30s. But I still give too many fucks, maybe about my work, because I feel it's so important for people to like it, because it's important to me, my work. So I still give a lot of fucks about that. And, even though a memoir is supposed to be personal, I didn't write it for anybody. I did write it how it should be without having this kind of reader sitting on my shoulder. But I do care about how it's perceived. And I really hope that it resonates with people and that they like it.
Thank you, Olia. And thank you for letting me sit in your haven. It's you're going to have to throw me out. I'm here. I moved in. I brought my case. Is that okay?
Come here, please come back.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.